Beneath the steps of a victory temple at Meroë, archaeologists found a bronze head of Augustus. The British Museum dates it to 2725 BCE. Its position suggests deliberate placement, but not who ordered it or exactly why. The unanswered question is precise. How did Kush, led in this crisis by Kandake Amanirenas, make Rome answer for its southern frontier? The evidence begins with an object, not a legend. Amanirenas did not conquer Rome. No surviving source supports that claim. The evidence instead points to a frontier war, a symbolic insult, and a settlement whose exact terms remain uncertain. To understand the consequence, we have to begin before the head reached the ground, at the meeting point of Kushite power and Roman expansion. Kush, centered at Meroë in the Nile Valley south of Egypt, already possessed its own political institutions and regional influence. Kush was not an empty margin waiting for Rome. It had rulers, religious institutions, craft traditions, and long experience dealing with northern powers. Amanirenas is known as a Kandake, a title associated with the ruling queens of Kush. The surviving record gives her authority, but only fragments of her life. Rome's annexation of Egypt in 30 BCE changed the balance, placing a new imperial administration immediately north of Kushite territory. The Roman province reached southward along the Nile, while Kush governed the lands beyond it. The frontier was not simply a line on a modern map. It was a corridor of river traffic, garrisons, taxation, trade, and political messages. Every new Roman outpost could be read in Meroë as administration and warning. Roman rule also carried imperial symbols into Egypt. Statues and images of Augustus, the ruler whose name now stood behind the province's authority. A statue was not merely decoration, but neither does every image record one political intention. The frontier could be tested through movement, trade, ritual, or force. In about 24 BCE, Roman literary sources say, force arrived. They report that Kushite forces raided Roman Egypt, advancing toward the frontier and removing imperial statues from Syene, the city later known as Aswan. Their accounts preserve the Roman view of a crisis that imperial authority had not prevented. Those Roman accounts matter, but they are political narratives written from the side that wanted to explain a humiliating emergency. They do not provide a neutral transcript. The important fact is not a dramatic number of soldiers. No reliable evidence supplied here gives one. The important fact is that Roman authority in southern Egypt was challenged, and that the challenge reached imperial representations. A distant ruler's image could be seized, moved, and made answerable. Roman reports mention statues removed from Syene. The British Museum object is different in one crucial respect. It is a bronze head of Augustus, found at Meroë, likely deliberately placed beneath the steps of a victory temple. That context strongly suggests symbolic treatment. It does not prove this was the same object described by Roman writers, and it does not identify Amanirenas as the person who moved it. The object narrows the question without solving it. The head's burial beneath the steps may be understood as a political statement, but that is a scholarly inference grounded in its location and the temple's commemorative setting. It may have marked victory, humiliation, ritual transformation, or several meanings at once. Archaeology gives us the object and its setting. It does not give us the spoken order, the exact date of placement, or the private intention behind it. The evidence is strong about context and limited about motive. Another object brings us closer to Kushite political language. The Hamadab stela, British Museum EA 1650. It mentions Amanirenas and Akinidad. The stela is Kushite evidence, not a Roman report, and its survival matters because it places the queen within her own state's monumental record. Yet even this inscription cannot supply every detail historians want. It names people and power more clearly than it narrates a complete campaign, leaving the military sequence incomplete. Akinidad's appearance beside Amanirenas is a reminder that ancient rule was rarely a one-person performance. The sources do not let us reconstruct every relationship between commander, ruler, court, and army. We can say that Amanirenas stood within a political network capable of action, We should not turn that network into a modern portrait of solitary leadership simply because one queen's name survives most vividly. The crisis involved institutions and partners as well as a named ruler. Rome responded. The Roman prefect of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, is associated in Roman sources with a campaign against Kush after the raids. Those accounts describe Roman retaliation and movement south. Their details require care. Victoria states often present campaigns as orderly, necessary, and decisive. Still, the reports establish a serious Roman response, not a border skirmish forgotten by the administration. This was a conflict important enough for Rome to answer with organized force. Which piece of evidence changed your view most? The Meroë Head, the Roman reports, or the Hamadab stela? Tell us in the comments. The crisis also exposed the unequal geography of empire. Rome possessed an enormous imperial system, but distance still mattered. Armies needed food, water, roads, boats, garrisons, and secure communications. Kush did not need to conquer the Roman world to make the frontier expensive and unstable. A raid, a captured symbol, or a threatened settlement could force an empire to spend attention far from its preferred center. Roman expansion had created reach, but reach carried logistical cost. Roman sources then describe Kushite territory being attacked and occupied in part, while later accounts connect the conflict to negotiations or accommodation. Here the evidence becomes especially difficult. A Roman writer may compress months of operations into a clean victory story. Modern historians compare those texts with archaeology, inscriptions, geography, and the later survival of Kushite power. The result is not one uncontested narrative, but a bounded set of possibilities about what followed the fighting. Later retellings often sharpen the story into a simple reversal. The one-eyed queen supposedly terrified Rome, seized Augustus, and won a perfectly defined treaty. Those images make a memorable legend, but they can erase the uncertainty that makes the history meaningful. The surviving evidence does not show Amanirenas personally removing the head, personally fighting every battle, or defeating all of Rome. A compelling story must distinguish what the sources report from what later imagination supplies. What can the evidence support? Roman authors report raids into Roman Egypt and the removal of imperial statues from Syene. The British Museum records the Meroë Head as found beneath steps at a victory temple, likely deliberately placed there. The Hamadab stela mentions Amanirenas and Akinidad. Together, these sources support a conflict in which Kushite action challenged Roman authority and imperial symbolism. They do not provide a complete battlefield transcript, identify every actor, or settle every sequence. The treaty outcome is therefore more modest than the legend, but more revealing. Some form of accommodation followed the fighting, yet the precise terms are disputed or not securely preserved in the supplied evidence. We should resist assigning tribute, borders, or ceremonial concessions unless a source actually gives them. The conflict did not erase Rome, and Rome did not erase Kush. What survived was not a clean victory certificate, but a negotiated frontier shaped by force and cost. That is the central legend versus evidence clarification. The head proves that an imperial image reached Kush and was deliberately placed in a consequential setting. Roman sources report raids, retaliation, and the removal of statues from Syene. The Hamadab stela places Amanirenas and Akinidad within Kushite political memory. But no supplied source proves Amanirenas personally buried Augustus, commanded every engagement, or won exact treaty terms. The uncertainty is not a weakness to hide. It shows how power worked at an imperial edge. So did Amanirenas make Rome regret invading Africa? In the careful sense, yes. Kushite resistance helped turn Roman expansion in Egypt into a costly political and military problem, and the imperial image at Meroë preserves that challenge. Rome could retaliate with force, yet still had to manage distance and expense. Kush could damage Roman prestige, yet still faced a larger military machine. The bronze head remains the documented image of that encounter, an empire's symbol beneath the steppes of Kush. Subscribe for the next original, evidence-led history story, where another surviving object challenges a familiar legend.